All right, today I'm going to be making cheddar cheese. So we're getting started first of all with our milk. I'm actually making a 5-gallon batch of cheddar cheese. You can downscale this recipe if you need to. I just have so much milk in the refrigerator, I need to do something with it. So we're going to deal with a 5-gallon batch today. Before I get started making my cheese, I always skim some of the fat off of, or cream off of the top of my gallons of milk, just because my cows put out a lot of cream. You don't have to do this. You can use full fat milk. Most of my cheeses, I skim as much cream as I can. Some fat is still left behind, so it's not skim milk cheese, but it's not full fat cheese. I use my cream to make butter, so the more cream that I collect over about a week's course, the more butter I can make. So when I skim my cream off of the milk, I just tilt the jug over slightly and pour the cream off the top layer. Once you start seeing milk come with your cream, you can stop and move on to your next jug. We're making cheddar cheese with, see, here's some thick cream with non-homogenized raw Jersey milk. The longer your milk sits unagitated, the thicker your cream layer will be on the top. And that's it for skimming your cream. All right, so we're getting our milk into the pot. This is how much cream is left on the top of our gallon. So we still have quite a bit of fat in the milk. Like I said, it's not a skim milk cheese, a part skim milk cheese. Just shake your fat / cream back into your milk. And then into the pot it goes. You can make cheese with store-bought pasteurized milk as long as it's not ultra pasteurized. You just won't form as nice of a curd, and you'll have a lower outcome on volume of cheese to volume of milk compared to using raw milk. So in the state of Alabama, it's actually illegal to sell raw milk. So to have access to raw milk, you have to have either a milk cow or a local source that will be willing to sell pet consumption raw milk, and then what you do with it after that point is up to you. So we've got our 5 gallons of milk in the pot. We're going to add our culture to this once we get it up to temp. We need to bring this vat of milk up to about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So most recipes will tell you you need to bring it up to temp very slowly. I am a little bit more aggressive about warming my milk up just because with 5 gallons of milk it can take an hour and a half to bring this up to temperature if you do it extremely slowly. The take-home point is really not to scorch your milk while you're warming it up. So constant stirring or near constant stirring, but you can use a little bit higher temp. So I keep my milk on this stovetop just above medium, and I stir it very frequently. It'll usually come up to temp in about 30 to 45 minutes, as opposed to an hour and a half to 2 hours if you heat it very, very slowly. Also, you want to get it to that ideal temperature as quickly as possible so you can get your culture in it and start developing the flavor that's going to ultimately give your cheese its character. One very important point to make when making cheese is that all of your equipment needs to be very clean and sanitized. You don't want any cross-contamination with bacteria or yeast, or your cheese is not going to age well, it's not going to turn out well, it's not going to have the flavor you're looking for. There are various different types of sanitizers that you can use. The ones that are made for brewing equipment work really well for cheese. or you can boil your utensils, all of your equipment. I have a lot of large equipment, including this big pot over here. So boiling anything is out of the question for me. What I use and what has worked well for me is just using hot soapy water that I've added some bleach to get that sanitation factor. I also go through my kitchen and I sanitize all of my countertops with soapy bleach water. And that's important to cut down on any yeast spores that are inevitably in your kitchen, to prevent contamination of your cheese while you're making it. All right, we've been heating our milk for about 20 minutes now, and it's come up to about 75 degrees in temperature. Now, most recipes will tell you to wait to add your culture till you come up to gold temperature, which with cheddar cheese is about 85, 86 degrees. We are going to go ahead and add our culture at 75 degrees, and I found that this improves the flavor of my cheese. Mesophilic cultures are active once you hit about 72 degrees. So this is the sweet spot for mesophilic cultures to start multiplying and giving your milk the flavor that you want for your cheddar cheese. Now you can use a commercially available standard mesophilic culture for your cheddar cheese if you would like. It's the same culture that's available in buttermilk, and I've found that the flavor of my cheddar cheese is best when I use buttermilk. So that's what we're going to be using. We have about 5 gallons of milk here, and we're going to be using 1 cup of buttermilk for each gallon of milk to culture our milk. I have some homemade buttermilk here that I've used, and we're just going to add that and continue to bring it up to temperature at about 85, 86 degrees. It's very thick buttermilk. The way I make my buttermilk, I take about 2 cups of pre-cultured buttermilk and add it into a jug, and then I fill it up with milk that was fresh that day, so it's already still warm from the cow, and let it sit on the counter for about 12 hours and then put it back in the fridge, and you've got good buttermilk. This will be our 5th cup, and that's what we're going to go with. You can see my buttermilk is very thick. Looks a little bit chunky, but it smells super good. It's just very cultured. And that's it. We're going to stir this in, continue to bring it up to 85, 86 degrees. Then we're going to start our timer on how long we let our milk ripen. All right, we've got our milk up to temperature. It's about 86 degrees at this point. And we are going to let this ripen for about 90 minutes. It's very important to have a well-calibrated thermometer when you're making cheese. If you're trying to calibrate a new thermometer, you just need to take it and put it in a cup of really cold ice water, and it should register 32 degrees. So I always make sure my thermometer is calibrated before I actually make cheese, because that's very important in getting the flavor profile that you're looking for by being able to hold your milk at the correct temperature. One other note with your milk while it's ripening, make sure if you're heating it on a stovetop like I am, pull it off the eye that you were using to heat it on, because that eye does hold some heat and will continue to raise the temperature of your milk. You don't want that to happen. Also, cover your milk. It's going to sit here for an hour and a half. You don't want anything to get in it, and you want to hold as much of that temperature that you can during that 90-minute process. Now we're going to need cheesecloths later in the steps of making the cheddar cheese. So I have my cheesecloth sanitizing right now. This is just lukewarm water with a few tablespoons of bleach in it. Again, you can boil your cheesecloths to sanitize them. You can use a commercial brewer's sanitizer. I just use bleach mixed with a little bit of water. I let these soak for about 10 minutes and then rinse them out with really hot water several times so there's no residual bleach left in my cheesecloths. I lay them on a clean towel just to air dry until I'm ready to use them. All right, it's been 90 minutes. Our milk has been ripening. During that 90 minutes, if you are using non-pasteurized, non-homogenized milk, your cream will rise to the top. So we're gonna get this stirred back in. It smells really good. It has a light buttermilk smell to it at this point, which is exactly what we want. I wanted to talk to you just briefly about the culture that I used. We used buttermilk. If I was not using buttermilk, the other options for culturing our milk are just a basic mesophilic culture. I believe Dansko makes one for making mesophilic cheese that's called an M100. There's also Flora Danica. So from a flavor perspective, what I have found that works the best for a cheddar cheese, Colby cheese, any of your basic mesophilic cheeses is going to be buttermilk or Flora Danica. Now you can use just a M100, that's fine. That's just your basic mesophilic culture, but what I have experimented with, tried, I've made a lot of cheese over the last few years with all of the fresh milk that we've had, and my favorite cheese flavor that comes out in the final press and the final aging of the cheese is going to be Flora Danica and buttermilk. So use whatever culture you like. Any basic mesophilic culture is fine, but these two, either buttermilk, Flora Danica, give you, in my opinion, the best flavor profile. So we're gonna go ahead and add our annata coloring to our cheese. This gives your cheese the bright orange color that you're used to seeing in cheddar cheese. You do not have to add this. This is completely optional. You can do a white cheddar, which will have more of a natural milk color. We're gonna go ahead and add this. I am using about a teaspoon of annata coloring, and I've mixed it with about a quarter cup of just regular water. Now, if you have chlorinated water, you do need to use distilled water. Don't use chlorinated water in your cheese. We have well water here, so I just use regular tap water. But that, as you can see, gives your milk a nice orange color, and that's gonna color your cheese. We're also gonna go ahead and add our rennet. Now this is what clots your milk or coagulates your milk so that you can actually make cheese. Now what I use is a 1/4 teaspoon of single strength rennet per gallon of milk. So we have 5 gallons of milk here, so I'm using a teaspoon and a 1/4, and I mix it with about anywhere from a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup of water. We're gonna add this into our milk and stir it for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then you're gonna leave the milk undisturbed to coagulate for about 45 minutes. You wanna do this quickly. You don't want your milk to start clotting while you're stirring. So it's a quick mix. Make sure it's completely incorporated through all of your milk, but don't stir for more than a minute. I usually do a bottom to top stir to make sure it is completely incorporated into all of my milk. That's it. Let your milk settle. You're going to want to put the lid back on your milk and let it sit here for 45 minutes undisturbed to form a big coagulated chunk of milk protein. All right, it's been about 45 minutes and we're going to check our cheese curd. So what we're looking for is a clear separation of the whey and the actual curd of the cheese. And we have a good break here, as you can see. So this is ready to go ahead and cut. Now what you're going to do for cheddar cheese is about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch checkerboard through this cheese. The smaller you make your initial cut, the drier your cheese will be. The drier your cheese is, the longer you can age it. So if you want a moister cheddar, make bigger slices through here. If you want a drier cheddar that you can age for longer, make smaller slices through your cheese. We are going to shoot for about a ½ inch. These may be a little bit over. We're just eyeballing it. Your cheese will start trying to move around the pot on you, so go kind of slow to keep it from spinning. That way you're able to get a slice through all of your curds as opposed to it spinning and you only getting part of it cut. The other utensil that I'm about to show you that I use is just a big whisk, and I use that to horizontally cut these curds that we've now got into really deep, long rectangles. They need to be cut throughout the middle of the pan. So what I use for that is a modified whisk. All right, this is the whisk that I use to make horizontal slices in my cheese. And this is not deep enough to go all the way down to the bottom without getting your hands in it. So make sure your hands are clean and sterilized. So I take this and I go all the way down to the bottom. I come all the way across, back up, and back across. And then I'll go over to the other side, all the way across, back up. Same
Is that
thing.
made for cheese?
No, this is not made for cheese. This is just a
Method that works.
method that works. That's a good explanation to it. This will cut up a lot of your large cheese curds so that you have about 1/2 to 3/4 inch pieces of cheese curd. Now, you're still gonna have some big pieces of curd in there that you're gonna have to break up with your spoon. We'll do that throughout the stirring process. But this has got a lot of that broken up. Now this needs to set for 5 minutes to let all of these curds kind of start to harden up a little bit on the edge so that they don't shatter and break apart once you start stirring this. So we're gonna time this for 5 minutes with the lid on, and we'll be back. All right, our curds have set for 5 minutes and done the process of healing. We're now going to start stirring them, and we're going to start heating these curds back up. During the process of letting your milk ripen and letting your milk come to a clot with the rennet, it does cool down from that initial temperature of about 85, 86 degrees. So I've got a thermometer in this, and honestly, we are only at about 84 degrees. But at this point, we're going to begin heating our milk up to about 100, 102 degrees. And you can see you'll still have some large curds in here that you'll break up with your spoon. That little whisk doesn't get everything, and your goal again is about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So you'll continue to break these up as you gently stir this. So over the next 30 minutes, we want to bring this up to about 100, 102 degrees is our goal temperature. And this is just a really slow process of gently stirring like what I'm doing. If you see any large curds, go ahead and break those up and do kind of a sweeping motion from the bottom to the top. And you're gonna do this for 30 minutes while this slowly begins to heat back up. I have my temperature, well actually I don't. We're gonna turn the temperature on our eye at about a high-low temperature. So it's at the higher end of where your low is. And the goal is to warm it up by about 3 to 4 degrees every 5 to 8 minutes. So don't heat it super fast, but you do want at the end of the 30 minutes to be up to about 100 degrees. All right, it's been right at 30 minutes and we've brought our cheese curds up to about 102 degrees. So at this point, we just need to cook our curds until they're fairly firm and to the consistency of almost like soft rubber if you were to squeeze those together between your fingertips. This will take about 30 minutes to an hour. The longer you cook them, the drier they will be, and the longer you can actually age this cheese. I've found that about 30 minutes is adequate to cook these curds and get a nice quality cheddar out of them. So that's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna stir constantly, but you do wanna make sure you stir every few minutes from bottom to top, like what I'm doing now, to kind of float your curds up like this. And that's gonna keep them from sticking together and forming a big blob on the bottom of your pot. So they do need to be stirred, but they don't have to be constantly agitated. So I've turned the heat off on my eye, and this will just kind of hold at this temperature over the next 30 minutes while we continue to stir and cook our curds. All right, it's been 30 minutes since our last check-in, and I've just gently stirred these curds every few minutes to keep them floating and not sticking together. Now, what we're looking for in the curds to be fully cooked and ready to start the cheddaring process is a firm but not hard curd. So as you make cheese more often, you'll begin to feel the texture difference of the curd hitting up against your spoon and know when it's ready. But when you first start out, basically what you're looking for is a firm, almost rubbery texture to your curd. So if you pick it up, and do use clean hands when you do this, it's kind of a springy, rubbery feeling to the curd. And that's how you know that it's ready. I've made cheese a lot over the past 2 years, and I can feel the way these curds feel bumping up against the spoon. And I know that the curds are ready to be strained up and begin the cheddaring process. So this has been a total of about an hour since we cut our curds and let them heal. So we did a 30-minute slow stir, and then we did 30 minutes of just gently stirring every few minutes to keep our curds agitated. A lot of whey has released during that time frame. So we went from big, chunky, fragile cheese curds to little small curds like this. This is exactly what you're looking for. Our temperature has stayed pretty steady at about 102 degrees. I turned it off after our initial 30-minute stir, and it stayed at that temperature just with me gently agitating the curds every few minutes for the past 30 minutes. So we're now going to get this whole pot strained up, and I'll show you how we start the cheddaring process. So I'm going to let all of these curds settle to the bottom of this pot so that they're easier to scoop out and consolidate into colanders. This will take about 10-15 minutes, and we're just going to let this settle, set here undisturbed, and then we'll come back. All right, so we've let our cheese curds settle, and I'm getting my colanders and my cheesecloths ready to put the curds into. Now, if you're making a smaller batch, you don't need 2 colanders like this, but because I've made a large batch of cheese, it's really going to take these 2 containers to contain all of it. Make sure your counters are wiped down and clean, because some of your cheesecloth may touch that. Inevitably, you'll drop a few cheese curds out on your counter. You want everything clean and sanitized. Like I said earlier, I use soapy bleach water to clean down all of my counters. These cheesecloths have been sanitized with bleach. My hands are clean and we're ready to get started. Initially, at the onset of me getting ready to make my cheese, I sanitized all my equipment. I do use this little strainer ladle thing to get my cheese curds out of this big pot. So we're gonna just get started. After about 10 minutes, your curds are gonna settle pretty nicely on the bottom. And these curds have a nice, gorgeous orange tint to them, and that's from the annatto coloring that we put in there. It does look like popcorn. What I typically get for cheddar cheese is just under a pound of cheese per gallon of milk. The drier your cheese is, the less cheese you're gonna get per gallon of milk. But for cheddar, which is a semi-dry cheese, typically about a pound of cheese per gallon of milk is pretty typical for raw milk. Now, if you are using pasteurized store-bought milk, you're going to get a lower yield of curd per gallon of milk, and that's pretty normal. I didn't mention earlier in the video, if you are using pasteurized milk, you do need to add a calcium chloride solution to your milk in order to get a good curd formation. You don't need that for raw milk. I forget to mention that often because I never make cheese with pasteurized milk. Just because we have milk cows and I always have access to raw milk. We're going to actually cover the curds with part of the whey. For about 10 or 15 minutes so that they settle under that weight of the whey and form a nice consolidated curd. All right, so we've got all of our curds down here in the colanders. We're just going to cover these with our cheesecloth. And this is where I say it's important to have clean countertops, clean cheesecloths, because all of this came in contact with our countertops. We're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes and kind of consolidate under the whey. Then these are colanders, so I'll be able to just lift it up out of the whey. But for now, we want it to sit in that and come together as a little cheese mass. So it's been about 10 minutes and our curd has settled under the whey. What we're going to do now is drain the whey off of the curd. I have these in cheesecloths, which we're going to gather together. And I'm going to consolidate our curd into one colander. To start with, this is going to go over here. I'm going to empty out this colander's whey over into our big pot of whey. Even if you're not making a big batch, it is really beneficial to have 2 colanders so you can go back and forth with your cheese curd. Just kind of pinch all 4 corners together. Once you start making cheese, you'll realize how much whey you have left. It's a large volume of whey for each batch of cheese, and it almost feels wasteful. It's not when you have 16 gallons of milk sitting in your refrigerator. Making cheese is a means of preserving your milk. So now for the cheddaring process, this needs to sit in a warm environment and be turned about every 30 minutes for 2 to 3 hours. What I do is turn my oven on the proof setting for just a little while, and then I turn it back off. The goal temperature is about 90 degrees. Proof setting is 100. So we want it a little bit below that proof setting. That's why I say I turn it on for a little bit and then I turn it back off. So this will go into the oven, which has been turned off at this point. We're gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes before we turn it. And I'll do that between 2 and 3 hours, just depending on how the curd is looking. So it's warm in here, but not hot. The proof setting's been turned off for probably about 15 minutes, but it's above room temperature in there. We'll set our timer and come back in 30 minutes. All right, it's the 30-minute mark, so we're gonna get our cheese out of the oven. Now all we're going to do is take this 1 colander, put it into our other bowl, and then this is now going to be swapped around. So the cheese that was on the bottom, that has come together nicely in the cheesecloth, it's now going to go on the top. I'm going to flip these like that, and it's going to go back in the oven, turned off where it was on the proof setting, so it's at about 90 degrees for another 30 minutes. All right, another 30 minutes has elapsed in our cheddaring process, and what I'm going to do at this point is take these cheesecloths off of these initial beds of curds. Go ahead and put it in there. I'm going to take this next one. Lay them together. And then we're going to allow these to sit another 30 minutes in the oven. What I will do is cover these so they don't dry out with this moist cheesecloth. But we're not going to cover the bottom. And that's it. All right, so we're down to our last 30 minutes with our cheese. We're just going to flip this one more time and let it sit and ripen and cheddar in the warm oven for another 30 minutes. There shouldn't be that much way under it. There's not. We're gonna go ahead and swap out bowls. We'll recover it with our cheesecloth. This will go back for 30 minutes one last time before we cut this up and salt it. All right, our cheese is done cheddaring, and we're going to weigh this so that we know how much salt to add to it. I know that my bowls weigh 15.7 ounces, so we're going to go ahead and turn our scale on, set to the ounces setting, and see how much weight we have here. All right, so we've got 99.55, and we're going to subtract the 15.7 from that. All right, so we did some quick math on the calculator. That comes out to, what was it, Evie? 5.24 pounds of cheese, which is about what I said. You get about 1 pound per gallon of milk. So we're just slightly over that, which is awesome. Anytime you get over 1 pound of cheese per gallon of milk, you're doing well, especially with a hard cheese like cheddar. Based on that, how many ounces was that, Evie?
83.85.
So 83.85 ounces. We want to have 2% salt added to that. So we want 1.67 ounces of salt to add to our cheese. So we're going to go ahead and zero this out. And start measuring our plain flaky salt. I really like this Diamond Crystal kosher salt. Works really well with cheese. You do want a nice flaky salt for cheese so that it soaks in well. What did we say, 1.67 ounces? This is where it helps to have a co-pilot in the kitchen to remind you of stuff. There we go.
Good enough.
Close enough. So, when you're putting your salt into your cheese, you're going to do this slowly so that you don't cause all of your cheese curds to just get really hard and not absorb the salt. And what we're going to do is take this cheese mass and we're going to cut it into little cubes. Somewhere between 1 and 3/4 inches of a cube, kind of like what you were doing when you cut up your cheese curds. You can break these apart with your fingers, that's fine. I find that it is faster to go this route. Just be careful not to throw your chunks of cheese out on the counter because your counter may have some undesirable bacteria or yeast on it. Again, we go back to it is very important and advantageous to have all of your counters wiped down before you start working with cheese. This is about the size of the chunks that you want your cheese cut into.
So yellow on camera, it looks like pineapple.
Mm-hmm. Some of these were not cut in half. Alright, that's good. As you can see, we put these two cheese loaves together, but they've sealed back together as one piece during the cheddaring process. That's what you want to happen. All of your cheese curds kind of start flattening out. Make sure your hands are clean and washed before you do this. I keep saying that. It's very important to have clean surfaces, clean hands, so you don't contaminate your cheese before you even make it to the aging process. In order for this cheese to age like you want it to, it needs to start off without any contamination. So we had a little over 5 pounds of cheese here. This will continue to dry down a little bit. As we age it, the salt's going to pull more whey out of it, and then the pressing process is going to pull more liquid out of it. So at the end of the process, we should have around 5 pounds of cheese. Now with the salt, you want to add this, oops, I'm spilling my salt. You want to add this about 1/3 of this at a time, because this is going to cause the outside of the cheese to get hard, and you want it to take up this salt. You don't want it to just crust over and not absorb the salt. So we're going to add a little bit at a time. You may choose to use gloves for this. Just make sure if you're using gloves, they're sanitized and or a pair of sterile gloves. Because again, you don't want to introduce any yeast. Yeast is your biggest problem with aging cheese. If you get yeast into your cheese, it ruins your cheese. It'll cause it to bubble up, have an off flavor, and it ruins the cheese. So yeast is your biggest enemy when you're making an aged cheese like this. And most everybody has some yeast on their skin. Most of your countertops in your kitchen, I mean, there's yeast in the air. Yeast is everywhere in our environment. So that's why I say you just gotta keep wiping down your counters. Make sure your hands are sanitized between each contact with the cheese so that you don't ruin your cheese before you even make it to the aging process without knowing it. Right. So these are doing really well. They're not hard on the outside, it's still nice and squishy. All of that salt has absorbed in. It's making a little bit of a brine down at the bottom, but I don't feel any more gritty salt. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to add our next bit of salt. We're going to mix this in slowly. All right, we're going to put our last little bit of salt in here. It seems like a lot of salt, but most of this actually washes out in kind of a brine that comes off of the cheese. Even when I add about 2% salt based on the weight of the cheese, I still find my cheese is not really as salty as I would like it to be. But if you add too much of this process, your cheese will not consolidate together into a nice loaf or wheel of cheese. So don't go over the 2% at this point. If you want to sprinkle on a little salt when you vacuum pack it, that's perfectly acceptable. And that can give it that final little bit of salt that it needs. I think this has come together nicely. Now we're going to get ready to press all of these cheese cubes into a wheel of cheddar. So the cheesecloth that we used earlier, you can just use that in your cheese mold. If you need to wash it out, you can. If you wash it out, I would recommend sterilizing it. What we've done is just thrown ours into that little bowl of bleach water to get it clean again, and we're going to rinse it out really good so that we don't leave any bleach behind going into this pressing process. All right, so we're going to get this into our press. What I have here is a cheese press that's got a little drain tray on it. I've got my mold for my cheese, and I've got a clean cheesecloth. Now this mold or this press, I wiped down same as I did my countertops. Everything is wiped down with soapy bleach water so as to not contaminate anything. Let's start getting this into the mold. Just kind of spread it out evenly in your mold. And it may sound counterintuitive, but when you first start pressing your cheese, you want to start out with a real light weight because you want this to release the whey. And if you press it really hard, it almost locks the whey in. So all of this is our little brine in here that was left over from salting our cheese. I pour all of that over the top. A lot of it's going to start draining out the bottom of our tray, but I want that to all filter through the cheese. And then you're going to spread your cheesecloth as evenly as possible. It doesn't have to be anything exact at this point because we're just now getting our cheese to come together. But just make sure you cover the top of your cheese like that. You're going to put your top on. And because this is a very deep mold, I use an extra lid because this is going to press down really deep. Plus this. Line this up as evenly as possible so that the weight's distributed evenly. This particular press only goes to 50 pounds of weight, so keep that in mind with whatever type of cheese you're making. I am limited to what cheese I can make based on 50 pounds of weight on this press. So we're going to just start at 20 pounds. And at about an hour, you can unwrap this and flip it if it's come together. I've never had my cheese come together at 1 hour at 20 pounds of pressure. So typically what I'll do is leave it at 20 pounds for several hours. Once it consolidates into a solid cheese round where I can unwrap it and flip it over and rewrap it, then I will. 20 pounds for about 2 hours. You will need to come back and check on this in about 10-15 minutes because in the first 30-45 minutes of pressing, you're going to lose a lot of volume on this. A lot of the air pockets that were in there are going to consolidate, and it's going to drop pressure on it very quickly. So even in the first 5 minutes, just stay with it, and you'll have to add a little bit more. Your whey is going to start coming off, and this will start coming together. So this needs to press for at least 24 hours at this point. We're going to do 2 hours at 20 pounds of pressure. Then we're going to go up to 40 for probably 4 to 6 hours. Before I go to bed tonight, I'll up it to as high as it'll go, 50 pounds on this press, and I'll leave it like that overnight. In the morning, I will rewrap it, flip it over, and then put it back on 50 pounds throughout tomorrow. Hopefully within 24 hours, all of your curds are consolidated into a solid round and you don't have any defects or anything like that. Now, if it's super dry, sometimes it's hard to get it to consolidate and you'll have some little defects or little craters in it. But if you've got enough moisture in it, like this cheese did appear like it had enough moisture in it that it's going to come together nicely, then within 24 hours you should have a solid wheel of cheese. All right, since our last video, things got really hectic around here and I failed to video whenever I took my cheese out of the press, rewrapped it, flipped it, and pressed it again. So I've actually made another batch since then, and I'm going to show you on this particular cheese. We'll also take a look at the cheese that I made from the earlier part of the video in my cheese cave now. So this cheese I made yesterday evening and got it into the press at about 20 pounds for 2 hours. Then it was rewrapped and pressed at about 40 pounds for about 2 hours. Finally, we cranked up our press to about 80 pounds after that and pressed it overnight. So we're going to rewrap this cheese, and the purpose of taking your cheese out of your mold and rewrapping it is to really get a smooth outside texture on your cheese, because when you put it in here, it goes in as chunks, and sometimes it takes several pressings to get those chunks as you can see here, to consolidate, come together so that you have a smooth round of cheese instead of this chunky cheese. So we're going to get this flipped around. Just try to keep your cheesecloth as smooth as you can around the edges. We're going to pop it back down into our press. Once it's down at the bottom, make sure you pull your cheesecloth up on the sides all the way around, because you'll end up with little creases otherwise. And then as smoothly as possible, you're going to cover it with the cheesecloth. It's helpful at this point if you have a smaller cheesecloth instead of one with all of these folds and everything. And because our little lift here is below the lip of our mold, you'll have to use some stuff to add some height so that you can still press it. Crank it back down to our 80 pounds of weight, which is as much as this press will do. And over here, you can see in the front, keep a little bowl for whey that will drip out slowly. This is just what drained overnight. And we're gonna let that sit for another 12 hours. At that point, I'll rewrap it and probably press it one more time overnight just to make sure everything's round, consolidated, and smooth. Now, if it looks like it's not coming together, you can press it longer if you need to. Typically, 24 to 36 hours is what I'm leaving my cheese in the press. Usually at least 24. Sometimes it needs one more overnight press if it's not coming together. All right, this is the little refrigerator that I use as my cheese cave. It's technically a wine cooler. I keep it at about 52, 53 degrees. So I'm going to show you the cheese that I did from earlier in the video. This, after its final press, was put onto a sanitized board and mat, and then put into the cheese cave. And I try to turn this about every 24 to 48 hours for about a week in here in the cheese cave, opened up like this. That allows the edges to kind of dry down some so you don't have as much trouble with mold. After that week, I will go ahead and vacuum pack my cheese and leave it to age. Cheddar, you can age really a year and a half, 2 years if it's super hard. If it's not super hard, 3 months is adequate to age cheddar for a mild cheddar. Okay, so the final step on how I age my cheddar is getting it vacuum sealed. So this cheddar has been sitting in my little cheese cave wine cooler for about a week. Now you don't have to cut it. You can certainly just put it in a vacuum seal bag whole, but I like to pull out a small amount of cheddar at a time, so I cut mine a lot of times into 4 pieces to actually vacuum seal. So there's a small amount of mold forming on the bottom part of this cheese, which is totally fine. It's not bad mold. And if we did not vacuum seal this cheese, the whole outside would continue to mold as it aged. Typically when we do cheese, I cut this outside rind off anyway. It usually develops some slightly off flavors during the aging process. And as you can see, it's dried down and it's got a nice rind on it at this point. And that's what I want to prevent any seeping out of whey as it ages in the vacuum seal bags. And as always, make sure all your equipment, hands, everything are sanitized so you're not introducing bad bacteria or yeast into your cheese aging process. So each of these 4 chunks are going to go into these bags and we're going to vacuum seal them. So that's how I do my cheddar for the aging process. We'll let this sit for at least a month, but you can certainly let it age longer. And this cheddar is pretty dry, so it would age probably well up to a year. But it'll have a great cheddar flavor really in 2 or 3 months. Always date your cheese when you made it so that you know when it's ready, especially if you keep making batches of cheese, you won't be able to keep up with what's what. I always double seal my bags, so if one of the seals gives way, you've got an extra layer of protection there. And that's your cheese. I'll just write cheddar on it and the date that I made it, and then that's it.